So welcome to the JB Media Digital Drop-In, the first one of 2022. I'm so excited to be with everyone. This topic today, I have to say, all morning since I first woke up, I have just had, I think, maybe 10,000 thoughts about this topic as I worked on it for this month. So I'm very excited to share some of this with all of you. I feel like as we're going into the new year, it's really important for us to set some really clear intentions about how we're going to show up in the world. And from a perspective of a business owner, as well as a perspective of someone who is working in marketing and someone who's teaching marketing, I really just did a deep dive on this topic over the last few weeks. And I think it was a really great way for me to get centered to start the year. And like I said, to really think about how I want to make an impact in the world, both individually and also with the teams that I serve, with the products and services that I'm offering. So we're going to ask some big questions today, and I'm going to share some personal experiences about especially social media and how we need to address kind of the bigger picture of that particular medium of communication. But to start us off today, I want to just first give a shout out to Justin, who is going to be here on the call, especially and available for any questions that come up. But essentially, I want to just give him a big shout out for really, I think, leading, especially here locally, the conversation around ethical marketing. And so I wanted to just set the stage really quick of how I think we've talked about this in the past, especially how Justin's agency has talked about this, because as a marketing agency, their entire team has put a lot of thought into the impact that they have as a company and the impact of the clients that they support, which I think is an important next part of the conversation when you're working in marketing. So I wanted to quickly review just where I know Justin has shared some great information at other classes in the past about this topic. So Justin, I know you're here. Feel free to jump in the chat or even unmute and hop in during this part of the conversation. But I wanted to just review again, sort of what do we mean when we say ethical marketing? And Justin often uses the phrase purpose-driven marketing, which I also just really appreciate, because I think that's an important component, right? Having that clear purpose and understanding what your contribution to the world is, what your contribution is to your customers is so key. He basically puts together 5 key principles that are happening in this conversation: being honest in all communications, practicing cultural sensitivity, following permission-based email practices, using digital advertising best practices that are ethical, and also focusing on white hat search engine optimization. So again, these are things I've been familiar with for a long time as well, but I really appreciate that Justin's really the one who's been able to sort of present all this information, especially in some great classes and an ebook that he wrote about just how we can actually take action on these things and put them into practice, right? And not just talk about ethics, but actually live ethics in our daily life. And basically, like I said, these 5 principles, I think there's a few different ways that we can immediately start to talk about them. One is honesty in marketing, like I said. And I think, Justin taught at our DIY event in the fall that really you have to be willing to commit to absolute honesty in your marketing with both your customers and your partners. So, I think that's where transparency is part of this, but, really being able to be upfront about the goals, about the motivators, about the values, and like I said, about the true impact of the work you're doing, whether it's positive or negative or a combination of both. So you have to really be willing, I think, to put yourself out there in some ways, right? Both as a leader in your business, but also as a brand itself. You're really putting yourself out there to say, we're going to be true and honest and real about what we're doing. But what we find is people really want this. So this was a great example, Justin, again, included in one of his previous classes about that. Just what is dishonest advertising, right? How do we make sure that we're being honest? And this has a lot to do with almost every part of media that we use, whether it's visual, whether it's text, whether it's video content, that we are really being accurate, being authentic in how we're talking about things. Also, cultural sensitivity comes up in so many different ways when it comes to marketing and communications. And I think most brands at this point, we really have to be going inward as teams and going inward as companies and organizations and really checking ourselves on these issues, right? Are we making absolutely sure that we are not victimizing, alienating, stereotyping, or misrepresenting? And can we accept that criticism when it happens? And we're not going to talk about cancel culture and all that stuff today, but I do think that's a whole other thing that we could talk about in a separate class, basically about, the importance of really, we have to develop, I think, the conversation to a point where we can really identify when should we take criticism that is deserved and that we need to receive so that we can improve upon things like this. And when we make these mistakes, be able to deal with them and actually address them from a value standpoint. But, also how can we make sure that we give people that space to learn? I think we're going to continue that conversation. It's going to be a conversation that isn't always easy, but it's really, really important. And so from this perspective, I just think all of us have to really be willing to dig in. I've shared a video in here that when you get a copy of the slide deck and the recording for today, you can actually go through the slides and click on these links. But this is a video that really stood out to me. It's actually a campaign done by Procter & Gamble. And I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of that corporation. I've of course used their products in some situations, but what I thought was interesting was they did a video series on diving into this issue of cultural sensitivity and created sort of mini kind of stories where people share experiences that they've had that are hard for them, right? And it gives you some insight into things that you may not think about, because if these people are different than you, you've never really stood in their shoes, right? So I watched a number of them over the last couple of years. And of course, there's a conversation to be had about corporations creating this kind of content, but I also found the content really interesting and useful. And this particular video is about the experience of LGBTQ people and them talking about specific types of experiences they have. This one in particular is called The Pause. So it's about, that discomfort that a lot of people in the LGBTQ community feel when they have that moment with a new person where they have to sort of come out or open up about their relationship status or things like that. So to me, it was really personal because I'm a member of that community and I've had the experience directly. But I think it's a great example of just, these are the types of things that we really have to be looking at. And sometimes looking into cultural sensitivity means we have to be willing to really accept that we have our own imperfections. And of course, there's many examples out there. Again, this is one of my favorite that Justin shared. Many examples of really insensitive campaigns and advertising have happened. And we see that backlash that comes up immediately. I think this story with the Pepsi commercial was a really interesting story, mainly because we watched Pepsi kind of do at first, maybe the thing that you shouldn't do, which is try to double down. And then eventually, I think, make the right decision to really take ownership of their mistake and to talk about it publicly. Whether or not corporations are suffering when they make these mistakes, that's, again, another conversation to have. But I think it's important to think about, how as brands, when we make mistakes, it really is key that we are accountable for them and that we take ownership of them. The next point, like I said, was permission-based email marketing. I think we all know that spam is something we don't enjoy. And so we really want to make sure as businesses that we are not engaging in things that can be interpreted as spam, especially because when you get flagged for those sorts of things, you can really lose some of your power and momentum when it comes to your email marketing. You will stop getting into people's inboxes. You can even be blacklisted at different times. And I think as an SEO expert over the last 18 or 19 years, the idea of relevancy is really important to me, right? So in studying Google for all these years, we know relevancy is one of their key focuses. They need the results that people get to be relevant to what they were really searching for. And so that's sort of how I feel about email marketing as well, that relevancy piece, what is going into my inbox needs to be important to me. I literally live that as something I need to have happening every day. And every day I sort of have to battle some level of information that's in my inbox that isn't relevant currently. So I think, that is really about the service that you are providing to your customers and your clients. And so it's really important to think about, the relationships and the value that you're bringing to people. How are you going to strengthen those? And are you going to make sure that you're really paying attention so that you are showing up for people when they really need you, and you're building this trust that they have in you, that they'll continue to say yes to those communications coming directly to them on a daily basis. So just an overview, there's many, many things we could talk about when it comes to email, but I think some key things that you could just take away right away are, don't buy emails. Don't really send emails to people where you've gathered up things out of your Outlook or your Gmail, and then you just start adding people to your newsletter, right? Send an invitation for them to join, do some personal outreach if you can, but really don't spam them, right? Which is kind of taking their email without their permission and just putting them into a campaign where they're going to get emails every month or get some type of drip campaign. Make sure your subject lines, your from and to fields aren't misleading, that you have a valid email in those places, and make unsubscribing really easy. These are just some basic things that I teach in almost every email class as being really important for people to understand. And of course, again, as you dig deeper into email, into things like GDPR, some of the legal things that we have around ethics when it comes to sending emails and people's information, there's so much more you could explore there, but some of those basic things you can do right away, no matter who you are, whether you're sending individual emails or you're using an e-newsletter system or something else. Also, when it comes to digital advertising, if you're using different types of code, things like the Facebook pixel, it's really important that you let people know that you're tracking them. There's also, I think, when it comes to it's interesting because I see the, sort of the cookie alerts that pop up in some ways. Those are often pop-ups, but then we have more marketing oriented things that are pop-ups, interstitials, things like that. We know for a fact that Google is really against having too many things that block people's view of the screen and what it is that the information is there. So that's where we want to be really thoughtful about how we're adding things that kind of pop up and interrupt people's experiences. Even if it is that little cookie alert, right? We want to make sure sometimes that that's at the bottom of the screen on mobile, that they can still scroll on the website and see different information. Also making sure that when you are partnering with people, when things are sponsored, when you're working with influencers, that you're transparent about that financial relationship that you have. So making sure that advertorial content is marked as such, right? Letting people know that something was bought and paid for is really, really key. And then we've got a much larger, I think, issue, especially in the US, around data privacy and transparency. And that, again, is a legal issue as well as a cultural issue, as well as a technology issue. And so we're going to see a lot of these things are literally happening as we're learning about them. So that's where, for me, again, in studying some of these topics and really digging in over the last few weeks, I realized that, I'm really in a learning process of still understanding the bigger picture of all of this. And we're going to dig deeper, like I said, into social media, which is where I think I'm most fascinated. But there's so much more. This is sort of a tip of the iceberg, right? These beginning pieces. The last piece is just around Black Hat SEO. I'm sure if you've studied search engine optimization, even in a small way, you've heard the terms Black Hat and White Hat. This is something that I think when you're in the industry is just a very fascinating conversation. I have certainly studied with search engine optimization specialists that would argue for Black Hat approaches. One of the reasons when I first met Justin was that I really liked Justin when we first met, was that I could tell right away that he didn't really ascribe to Black Hat approaches. And as I was learning more and more about SEO and writing more content and testing more websites, I was really finding that the white hat area was really where I wanted to spend my time, because it had to do with creating great content, which is really my passion. So Tracy, I hear your question about, can we define those a little bit? So black hat and white hat SEO are basically just an approach. And Justin, feel free to chat in or add anything here. They're just two different approaches to search engine optimization. And I feel, white hat SEO mostly focuses on strategies that are about creating great content, creating great engagement from people, and really building up authority through things like linking with other websites, through public relations, even through some of your social media networks. You can start to create positive outcomes on your website through social media traffic. And then that website behavior can actually improve your authority, right? So these are very organic strategies. They're very natural strategies. They're strategies, in my opinion, where you have to prove that what you're providing on your website is great content that people enjoy. Black hat SEO, I think, although it does have some content focus, on a lot of levels, it's about how we manipulate the technology in some ways, how we can kind of, I would use the phrase, trick Google into thinking that our websites are more authoritative. Yeah, Justin, thanks so much for adding that in. So it's all about gaming Google, right? And using automation and other tech tools to make SEO kind of results happen faster and things like that. So yeah, so it's basically, to me, it's sort of like this game of tricking Google's system, because it is technology, into thinking that websites are more authoritative than they are, doing different types of strategies, which are sometimes more technical and, like I said, sometimes content-based, but involve typically, like Justin just mentioned, a lot of automated systems where you're using software to add comments or create links or things like that, right? And there's an interesting part of black hat SEO where people are really monitoring what's happening and like adapting their strategies very, very nimbly and quickly so that they don't get penalized for things. That's where, yeah, and Justin, I see your clarification. Black hat uses techniques to build fake or automated links and content versus white hat creating real links and real content. So yeah, exactly. That's even a better description of what the technology is doing, right? To me, it's that they are using this tech to really try to trick the system, but not in the same way every time, because you can't trick Google forever, right? Eventually they'll say, hey, what you're doing is inappropriate. So you have to almost like shift your strategy over and over and over to make sure that you never get flagged by Google in a negative way. So there's a lot of, just like I said, this like constant pounding attention to everything while you're kind of trying to manipulate and walk a very thin line of what Google is going to say is actual good search engine optimization. So Google is pretty clear on what they define as black hat, and they will remove some websites from the results altogether if they abuse the rules too frequently. So that's why black hat experts, I think, have to do this kind of dance, right? Where they're sort of always making sure that they don't get flagged for anything. If they did, it would, create some real problems for the website and whether or not it can show up in Google. So again, those are just 5 kind of key ethical marketing kind of places to start in this conversation for all of you. And again, I think these are great ones that Justin has shared in the past, and I really appreciate how actionable they are, because they're things that we can put into practice right away when we're thinking about our email, when we're thinking about how we're adjusting things on our website, when we're talking to SEO professionals and thinking about hiring them for hiring people to do our digital ads. How can we really make sure that we have some conversations about the approach they're going to use? So this larger conversation of ethical marketing over the last year has led me into a deep dive around social media. And some of you who've already heard me do digital drop-ins before know right around the time I turned 40, I did what lots of other people do. You evaluate your life. And I really evaluated my career and, dug deep with myself about how I feel about social media technology, especially because I spend so much time on it and the impact it's having. I've read a lot of studies over the years as an educator about the negative impacts. And so the last 5 or 6 years, I've really started to dig more deeply into how do we make sure that the technology that we're using to connect people with each other and to connect our brands and our organizations and companies with people in a real authentic way, how can we make sure that that stuff is being used to support people, to lift them up, to help people, instead of having these negative impacts that we know exist and have now been studied by tons of different universities and scientists and psychologists and neuroscientists. So we have a lot of information, especially in the last 10 years, around how social media in particular, but what we call persuasive technologies overall, are impacting us. And this is why, for me, the documentary, The Social Dilemma, was such a powerful thing to see come out into the public. So if you haven't watched it, again, when you get these slides and the recording, you can just click onto these links and you can watch the trailers. And I really believe in my heart that if you have time at the beginning of this year, if you're a business owner that's using things like email and social media and your website to promote yourself, or you're a marketing person, especially that's working in the field, I think it's really important that you put this on your list of things to do, because if you haven't explored this topic, it's going to be a great primer in what some of the main issues are. And because of The Social Dilemma, I have been taking a class with the Center for Humane Technology, which I'm really, really enjoying as I go into the new year. And so to me, this in some ways, it is sort of a movement that they are really trying to build for the public. But I think those of us who work in the field and use a lot of these tools every day to promote ourselves, or are entrepreneurs and really have to understand the power of these tools, it's created a responsibility for all of us to really become aware of what we're engaging with on a daily basis, and what we're encouraging other people around us to engage with on a daily basis. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is watching that documentary. The next documentary that I would recommend that you consider digging into is called The Great Hack. Again, you can click to watch the trailer when you get the slides. This is about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and Facebook and its role in that scandal. And again, I think it's a really important documentary to watch, to have an awareness of, how we are dealing with persuasive technology, how it's impacting our culture. In addition to these two things, I have included some great videos about this topic that feature Tristan Harris, who runs the Center for Humane Technology. So when you have time, again, these are great. You can listen to them podcast style, but I feel like they are, again, just a sort of great way to kick off this conversation if it's something new to you, or to really start to understand the questions that we're asking. And we're going to cover them, some of them today, but I really want you to go after the experts when it comes to this, because as I mentioned, I am learning along with all of you what this stuff really means. And it's a really big topic. So that's where I think listening to some of this, setting the stage, is really important. Listening to the people that I think are at the leading this conversation, because they have a very strong understanding of, let's say, the all the different areas in which this topic is going to impact our world, right? So we can say that it's just about social media and whether or not social media is good for people, but it actually taps into so many other things that need to be addressed. So at this point, we've had the technology for so long that it's actually made a human impact on people. So now we're having to deal with not only what does the future hold, but we're dealing with what is this impact. So Tristan Harris says that this issue, the social dilemma, it's the climate change of culture. So before we dive into details, I just wanted to set the stage that this conversation, we're not going to solve it today. We're not going to be able to resolve it in any way, right? All we're going to be able to do is start to think about it differently, and to realize, again, as communicators, as creators, as leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners, all of us are engaged in persuasive technologies on a daily basis. And if we are going to be engaged in those technologies, we need to have very, very good self-awareness about the impact of those technologies, because it's affecting us and our customer bases and our client bases. we also really need to understand, like I said, that we have a responsibility with these tools. And we're even going to question whether or not they're tools, right? So we have a responsibility, I think, to have that awareness. So it's not just cultivating the awareness, but it's cultivating your understanding that if we're going to solve some of these issues going forward, it's really key that we prepare ourselves for what is sort of a long game, right? It's going to be, I think, a few years. If we're lucky, it'll be just a few years that we'll start to have some legal and some real regulatory things being implemented. I also think that we will see, hopefully, the people who design this technology really dive into this conversation with the Center for Humane Technology and change our business models, change our approaches to the technology. So again, persuasive technologies, essentially the Center for Humane Technology would explain that they are scientifically designed to manipulate human behavior towards a desired goal, like increasing time on a website or user engagement. Now, as a marketer, of course, I want both of those things, right? I want increased time on my website and I want user engagement. And there is a part where we look at human design, usability, user experience, and we figure out how to best serve people. But as we move into the persuasive technology discussion, what we start to realize is that really what we're doing is we are guiding people rather than giving them choices. We're leading them down a pathway because we are using what we know about their brains to manipulate them in some ways. And so they call this the race to the bottom of the brainstem, right? That we're putting people in a certain mindset that allows us to then convince them to spend more time, convince them to engage in something, rather than them having a more sort of conscious involvement in that choice. And so that's where this conversation around persuasive technologies has been developing, like I said, for quite a few years. Universities especially have been putting out studies about this for a long time. So there's lots of different things that happen because of these technologies that we're tracking. And it isn't to say that it happens exactly the same to every single person. We're just seeing that these impacts are occurring and they can be directly tied to the experience people are having on their smartphones, inside their social media accounts, and so forth. And I think one of the base points that the Center for Humane Technology tries to share with people is that the human brain, who we are as people, our actual hearts and minds, that it's important for us to make choices deliberately, right? That is something that we have to do in order to be healthy in a lot of ways. So that's sort of an oversimplification of a very big topic, but we have to be practicing making those choices, right? And honing our abilities to make those choices based on how we feel, based on our values and things like that. So as we've introduced these persuasive technologies, and we have had kind of an approach to them that says, we want to get people to do as many things as we can. We want to get them to say yes to things almost subconsciously without making a choice. As we've allowed that approach to continue to be how we're making decisions about the industry and the tools, what happens is we're really creating this extractive experience, right? Where we're capitalizing on what essentially the Center for Humane Technology would say is human weakness rather than human strength. And one of the biggest challenges for me in this conversation was this, that I taught for many years in my classes on social media, that you didn't have to be afraid of it because it was a tool. It was like a hammer. It was like a drill. You just had to learn how to use it. You had to pick it up. You had to have intention. And so one of the things over the last few years that really challenged me to dive into this topic is this quote right here from Tristan Harris, right? That if something is a tool, it's genuinely just sitting there waiting patiently. If something is not a tool, it's demanding things from you, it's seducing you and manipulating you, and it wants things from you. Social media isn't a tool waiting to be used. It has its own goals and it has its own means of pursuing them by using your psychology against you. So of course, as an educator, because I helped a lot of people work through their fear of social media and tried to empower them to see it as something they could use for positive, which it still is, I also really, as the technology has developed, had to really admit that Tristan is right? That at this point, with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, with the different types of algorithmic technology that we have developed, that, our phones really do demand our time. And as somebody who uses my phone every day and is on technology 8 hours a day or more every day, essentially, I really know that it does affect me. It does seduce me. It does demand things from me. So I can't deny that, right? So that's where, for me, like I said, this became a really personal challenge over the last 5 or 6 years to dive into this and question everything about my approach, question how I'm talking about these things and how I'm perceiving them, because the technology is developing so quickly that, we have to make sure our perspectives on the technology are evolving as fast. And that, like I said, we are building ways to stay self-aware and ways to know and understand how the technology is changing if we're going to be using it every day ourselves, because it will have a personal impact. And if we're going to connect with our customers that way, how are we going to maintain our ethics if the actual software and systems that we're using are questionable inherently in what they are? So that's why, like I said, it's a big conversation, I think, is happening amongst the people who create these type of systems, people who worked for Facebook and Instagram and Google. But this conversation now needs to start trickling down to a lot of us in the business world and a lot of us that are creators of content, because we really need to be aware of the effect that these things are having and how it's impacting us individually and our entire culture in some ways. So a few of the prompts I just wanted to give you, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you some of these great links because I think they're super helpful. The first is this social media, how social media hacks the brain, which is a great resource from the Center for Humane Technology. And they break it down into certain areas, right? So how social media tools are actually adjusting your behavior. They make the trivial seem urgent. They encourage seeking and always seeking more without fulfillment. They force us to multitask. They weaponize fear and anxiety. They encourage constant social comparison, and they tell us whatever we want to believe. So again, my question for everybody today, and just as we think about these things, is which one of these examples shared have you experienced, right? And feel free to share this in the chat if you want. Have you actually been on social media and literally experienced this? Because some of these I have directly experienced, right? I'm drawn towards multitasking. So multitasking for me, this is something I'm constantly battling so that I can have more time to be creative. Yeah, and Molly, I see your comment, like feeling personally called out because it's all of it. Oh, it'll even get better as we dig into some of the other things, right? Making the trivial seem urgent, that is probably one of my top ones. I feel like I'm constantly battling that as a social media manager. I'm constantly trying to avoid that experience. So yeah, so we all can really see, even from the comments that, we're all experiencing that. So the next thing I want to share is this ledger of harms. This is something that the Center for Humane Technology has put together on their website that is basically a outline of kind of what are the negative impacts that we know are happening because they've been studied, we're collecting the data. They break it down into the next generations, making sense of the world, attention and cognition, physical and mental health, social relationships, politics and elections, systemic oppression, and do unto others. So you can see here, this is an intense list of negative impacts that we have to address. So again, we can't get overwhelmed by this. We just have to realize these are the real studies that exist. This is the real data we've collected. And we're gonna have to figure out how to solve some of these problems, right? So what I've really encouraged myself to do is when looking at this, think about, where do I want to start? When it comes to addressing how I'm going to even change my own personal behavior, which one of these things is at the top of my values list? They're all important. They all need to be addressed. But for instance, for me, I think social relationships and physical and mental health are probably at my top level. Right? We need to solve all these problems. We have all these issues. They're definitely coming from some of the experiences that are happening on social media. But I feel like when people relate more to each other and when they are physically and mentally sort of grounded, that they can start to address other issues, but these things are core to them being able to address anything else. So again, that's another prompt that you can take home and think about. But out of all those invisible costs, right, all those harms, which one really stands out to you? Because I think if we're going to get involved in this conversation at all, we can't address it all at once, or at least for me, my brain will completely explode, right? The last resource I gave everybody is basically the Center for Humane Technology's approach to, so what can we do? How can we be positive? Because there are things we can do. This isn't sort of a doomsday conversation. Like I said, I approach this conversation the same way I do climate change. We really still have to look at the positive possibilities that are there and take as many actions as we can. So this is where they really map out, what can we really do, right? And they break down certain groups of people for how we can kind of come together and address this issue. So I think it's important to think about, what is one step that you can take as an individual? What's one step your brand can take if you want to think of it from that perspective? And how can we just think about the fact that the technology adapts quickly? If we want the technology to be better, if we want the technology to be positive for people, we can actually make that happen. I think as quickly as we have gone in the wrong direction, we can go in the right direction if we make an effort, but it's going to take a lot of us putting pressure on the system from all sides. So that's why everybody has a role to play. So what do you think do you think your brand has a role to play in this movement, and what ideas do you have about how you and your team can get involved, right? And there's going to be one more resource I give you, which will give you even more actionable items. But even having a conversation with your own team about this is important. If you're a business owner and you have marketing people, you have to realize that when they work on social media all day long, there's a negative impact to that. They need the tools available to them to make sure that those impacts really aren't harmful to them. If you're a business owner and you're doing everything yourself, you need to be really self-aware that you're not burning yourself out on these technologies so that it becomes interruptive to your ability to achieve your goals, right? So no matter how small or big your business is, I feel like there's a conversation to be had here. So again, if there's any questions, chat them in or drop them into the Q&A. The last few slides that I wanted to share are really taken directly from a lot of conversations that I've been watching online with Tristan Harris. Again, I feel like he's made this conversation very accessible to people. It's really helped me wrap my mind around things that are really big conversations. And so I really encourage you. Like I said, there is a great podcast that's part of the Center for Humane Technology, but you need to take this stuff in bite-sized pieces, right? But one of the best talks I saw him give, he talked a lot about this old paradigm, new paradigm, which is what we're talking about when we say, how do we make this shift from this old approach to technology, this old kind of way of thinking and this old sort of business model that we have, and we shift it into something that is really going to be positive for everyone. Because we do know, and thanks for that comment, Jen, we do know that, like I said, there's so many positives to this technology. I talk about none of this to take away from the amazing, powerful things that humans have been able to do with this tech. But what we want is more of that, right? So the old paradigm, you can see, basically what Tristan talks about is that the old paradigm of thinking when it comes to building things like Facebook, Google, Instagram, right, TikTok, so they minimize responsibility and commodify humans, right? That we are actually selling people's attention to advertisers, and that as companies, tech companies, we say we have very little responsibility for what happens to people, right? So we give users what they want, we disrupt everything. Technology is always neutral. We are who we choose, right? It's just a tool, it's how you use it, right? Same mantra I used to give. Growth at all costs, designed to convert and obsess over metrics. So these are things that I'm very familiar with as a marketer. Some of these things are concepts that I've even really believed in at different times in the past. And what they're encouraging us to do is to understand that that old paradigm we now know after having the internet for a few decades is creating these negative impacts on people, right? So I'm sure all of us have experienced some of this, right? Information overload, addictive use of things. We've been dealing with, as a culture here in the United States, so much polarization, right? So much fake news and things like that. So all of these kind of things are really hurting people. What we want to do is take the technology and really reframe how we've been approaching, how we build it, how the algorithms work, and things like that. Right? So see in terms of human vulnerabilities, find the strength in human brilliance, right? Make sure choosing is inevitable, that people have to make choices. That's a healthy activity for our brain, right? Don't just sort of get us to go down a rabbit hole that we can't escape. Bind growth with responsibility, enable wise choices, obsess over what really matters and not just the data, right? Nurture awareness. So, this is where I think it's just key for us to realize we're not saying, I'm personally not saying throw everything out the window. Of course, if you want to get rid of your tech for a while, I'm a big fan of tech detoxes. I did my first one in 2020. I think it's really valuable practice. And I think there's important things that we have to do like that. But I'm in no way saying that we can just, we need to just throw out all of the different things that we've built. I think that we have to just really shift to making sure that's what is underneath what we're building is something that is really good for people, right? And I see your comment here, Tracy, that you've recently engaged a social media person for help, and you're suggesting Facebook posts 3 to 5 times a week and LinkedIn twice a week as the ideal amount to get and hold attention. You're not sure that anyone has that much to say. What are your thoughts on best ethical practice? So I will say that, as a social media manager, she's correct in the frequency there. And I think that's the issue with a lot of these systems, is that to compete, you have to be posting because that's how the tech was created, right? If I only post once a week, I don't tend to compete at all in the news feeds to a certain extent. So at the same time that that's true, a good social media person is really going to monitor those posts and really see which posts actually get the engagement that you need, and then is really going to refine their approach to try to listen to the people that are engaging. Are they commenting? Are they liking and hearting? What are they doing? Can you get them to provide more feedback and engage in the conversation more? If they engage in the conversation, can you really pay attention and start to identify what matters to them? So that, again, over time, from an organic perspective, you are really paying attention to what works and what doesn't by listening to the audience, and then developing content that really meets their needs or provides what it is that they're looking for. So it's funny because the ethical issue is we can't really get away from how it works, because essentially, the way the algorithm itself functions is questionable inherently, right? So until the technology shifts, we can't escape the ethics of that technology, right? But what we can do is focus on our customers and really think about the value of what we're bringing. So to your point, not saying things just to say them, right? Really thinking, standing in the customer's shoes, standing in the client's shoes, standing in the shoes of somebody who doesn't know about what you're talking about, and really saying, how can I bring something of value? How can I do something that is helpful to them? And not just, a gimmick, not just trying to game the system like we talked about to get them to pay attention, not just to be clickbait, right? We want to stay away from those types of content things. And we really want to look at how we just show up authentically. And I think even when you're paying for advertising and you're boosting posts, to me, you want to boost the things that have that authenticity. We can't get away from the ethical questions about Facebook ads and Instagram ads in the first place, right? And so, yeah, I see some other comments in here. Thanks so much, Kyle. Yeah, again, I'm really working to make sure that we can address this without scaring everybody away, because I think the conversation is going to continue. We're going to have this conversation all year as part of our digital drop-in series, and look at the ways that the different things are connected to this conversation. But I think we all really have to get familiar with this conversation at all, and be having it not just in a business and professional sense, but even with the people we love, with our own kids, with our own partners. And again, I'm going to give you some great steps about that. And Molly, I see your comments too. I know you understand, as somebody who works in the field, right? It's really important for us to take care of ourselves. And I think marketing people and entrepreneurs, we've had big conversations about self-care. And if I'm honest, this conversation about social media and persuasive technology has a lot to do with whether or not we're taking care of ourselves. And I see Bridget in there commenting. I think, Bridget, in some ways, we've had a lot of conversations about people loving themselves. And I think this idea of ethical marketing, this idea of the social dilemma, in looking at how technology is impacting marketing and communications, I really believe if we look at the core of it, we're talking about whether or not people love themselves and take care of themselves whether or not we love ourselves and take care of ourselves, right? So that's where the conversation, I think, becomes so, so powerful. And it really, really matters across the board. So again, when you're thinking about the paradigms, what part of the new paradigm excites you the most, right? And when you're thinking about this paradigm, I think this conversation is going to keep evolving. So are there things that are missing? Are there other things you'd add to this, right? That's where you'll see the Center for Humane Technology wants people to start thinking about how we add to this movement, how we add to this new approach and new perspective. And it's funny because the Center for Humane Technology will talk a lot about technologists, the people who build the tech that we're talking about. But I feel like business owners, entrepreneurs, I think marketing and communications people, especially, we have a great role to play in this conversation. So again, the last thing that I'm going to give you is this link to the Take Control Kit. This is a tool, again, from the Center for Humane Technology that I really, really love. Essentially, it is sort of, like I said, a beginning, take some steps to make changes in your own life or recommend them. And yeah, Britta, I just want to acknowledge your comment there. The old paradigm is based on fear and the lack. The new paradigm is based on abundance. I love that perspective. I think that's really beautiful. But here you can see Take Control. What I find amazing is a lot of the people that put these recommendations together for the Center for Humane Technology, they are people who built Pinterest, built Instagram, built Facebook, built Google. And these are things that they've implemented in their own homes to try to increase their own health and to increase the sort of health of their own family members, their own children. So turning off notifications, removing toxic apps, downloading helpful tools. They recommend quite a few for things like tracking your screen time, removing your blue light, staying focused, practicing mindfulness. Years ago, Justin introduced me to the Headspace app. I don't even know how many years I've been on there. I'm still a user of that app. I love it. It has really helped me learn how to put my phone down. Even though I'm meditating on the app, it's really amazing to me how that mindfulness I do every day, it has really helped me create a lot more control around my tech in general. Eliminating outrage from your diet, following voices you disagree with, being compassionate, setting boundaries, fully disconnecting 1 day per week. That's something I've been working on for the last 2 years. I don't get there every week, but I try. Remembering the positive and supporting local journalism. So the question is, these are things we can do right now as individuals to start to understand this conversation more and to actually help us deal with our own personal impacts of persuasive technology. So I definitely think, like I said, this is something you can share with other people. It's something you can use in your own life. I think this is something that we should be talking to our customers about. One of my most favorite things of 2020 was when I went on my digital detox. I was literally offline for 7 days. I had never since 2003, I had never taken more than about 3 days off of my tech. So to take a whole week was a big deal. And one of the most beautiful things was that when I sent out the email to my clients that I wasn't going to be available that week, what I got was a bunch of positive support from them and how proud they were of me for doing that. And so, I think it's really important for us to be building networks around us where we understand that people need those breaks, right? So what's one action you're going to take to ensure that your relationship to technology is healthier? Because as we all know, in a lot of ways, as we look at how we can change the world, we always have to look at how we can change ourselves first. And the ultimate goal for me is showing people what is possible can help transform consumer distrust of existing platforms into consumer demand for something else. So this is where my class at the Center for Humane Technology, they're really helping us get inspired to believe that what's possible is that, instead of breeding more distrust and anger and frustration and things like that, that what we can do is help educate the public, help educate ourselves, our clients, the people around us, and then eventually demand that these things are changed, are adapted to be for humans, to help us be stronger, be better, be healthier. Yeah, and so I really just want us to all think about this. And yeah, I'm gonna stay for a few extra minutes. I know we're coming right up at 1 o'clock. If there's any questions, please feel free to chat in or pop them in the Q&A. I will say I love the conversations that are happening here in the chat. So thank you all for your positive feedback on this. Like I said, I wanted to kick off our new year with something that I think, if we can just take some time in January to think about how we want to engage with these tools, to think about the impact in our own lives as we do our marketing throughout the year. We're going to be better at it. We're going to have a better experience. It's not going to drain us. It's not going to burn us out. We're going to feel stronger, and we're going to have, I think, an experience that then impacts the people around us. So Tracy, yes, we'll be sending out the recording. We'll be sending out the slide deck as well. So you can click on all those links that I shared. We do post this a lot of times to our YouTube channel. I know we've got some backup in our YouTube, so we got to get a bunch of stuff up there, but you will get an email since you registered today directly to look at this. It's also on our JB Media Institute Vimeo. But like I said, if anybody would like to connect with me on this topic, please feel free. Again, we've got, sorry, there's a word missing there. We've got future monthly webinars coming up. Again, we're going to be focusing on ethical marketing and as it relates to different topics throughout the year at different times. So I'm excited to sort of introduce this as like a real key component of what I think our conversations need to be about in 2022. Also, keep an eye out for an email. We're going to be launching a monthly class series in February. So I'm going to hopefully be teaching digital drop-ins at the beginning of the month and then doing classes that you can come and attend online virtually. So we're going to be sending out an announcement about all those topics in the coming weeks before the 1st of February. So hopefully you all will look into that. But again, if you want to reach out directly to me in any way just to talk about this, or you want any other additional resources around this topic, don't hesitate to email me directly at any time. But again, thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I will just say again, thank you to Justin for all the work that he's done on, I think, bringing the ethical marketing topic, especially into our area in Asheville, but especially as well across the country. It's been, I think, just delightful for me to know that somebody I work alongside with in this industry is already kind of on top of how important it is for all of us to think about these things. Yeah, thanks so much for being here. And Bridget, yeah, I see your comment about how you're struggling with creating content and not obsessing about the algorithms. And, that's something, like I said, feel free to reach out to me. I think a lot of times, it's about not overthinking it, because what happens is sometimes that technical part of things, it starts to interrupt our creativity. So we have to find that middle ground. As an SEO writer, I've had to deal with that, I think, quite a bit in my career, where I'm really a natural writer. I want to be creative, right? But there's all these different considerations that I have to take into account when I'm writing to optimize a website. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about that. I think there's a lot of different exercises you can do where, a lot of times just a good example really quick would be, if I'm going to work on a website and do some of the content, before I actually go back through and implement keywords and do things like that, I really go through and I map out, what are the website pages I'm writing? What are the goals of those pages? Who is it that I really want to talk to on those pages? And I write something from that more intuitive kind of personal place where I say, I just want to feel connected and I want the person reading this to feel connected about the topic. So how can I make that happen? Once I've actually gone through that creative process, then I can step away and come back later and think about how I maybe tweak out some of what I'm doing to be a little bit more, technically sound. So maybe I add in some more headings. Maybe I, think about how I could have used some keywords some places. But that allows me to go through my creative process, my connecting process, and then to go back and sort of evaluate the results of that process to make sure that, it's going to make sense when I'm putting it up online. And Sumaya, I see your question as well. Glad to see you here. How can you support clients who are burned out by social media? You're trying to encourage more email marketing, but you're curious to hear your thoughts. It's so good to have you joining us today. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think Justin has encountered something similar, where not only are some clients just burnt out on social media, some of his clients that are in the impact and socially conscious space really don't want to give any more money to Facebook and Instagram. They'd like to give their money to something else. So they're removing their ad dollars from there and looking for other options. So I think that, email is a natural place to go. I think that, one thing that people really need to consider is that list building, it has always been important. It is still important. And I think list building, along with how do you create content that has real value for people. So thinking about webinars, thinking about ebooks, thinking about different types of classes you could do online, thinking about those type of things where people give you an email in exchange for an actual service or for actual support. That's where, I think there's so many different things you could explore there besides just, let's say, an email newsletter, right? There's so many different options for list building. And that list building can be really valuable, especially when it really attracts very specific people for very specific reasons, because those people typically, they want you in their inbox, which means you've already crossed a certain level of into the customer journey with them, right? You've already built some trust for them to even sign up. So I just think the value of that is just never going to go away, and the ways that we can implement it so that it's more interesting and exciting for people and actually valuable and contributes to them instead of just sending emails for the sake of sending a million of them. I think we're just going to see that there's more and more opportunities there. I also think there's a lot of different, I've had some companies that are on Facebook, and we're really talking a lot more about Facebook groups and how we utilize those instead of the business pages, instead of those pieces that are sort of tied into that. And the groups have different functions. The way that you show up to those people is different. So networking, which is essentially what I feel Facebook groups is, has a lot of value, and there are still ways to use social media for that instead of what we see as kind of that traditional thing. I also see live streaming in that sort of pile of different tools that we can use, right? So we're not just sort of posting for the sake of posting endlessly into, the never ending bowels of time, right? I just feel like that's where a lot of the burnout comes from. So just looking at the tools and how can we use them differently? How can we use stories to be more in the moment, right? How can we do some of those things to get away from just that more traditional kind of burnout feature that's happening? I find, like, for instance, with artists, sometimes using the stories feature is just more fun. It's less pressure, right? It's more of a in the moment kind of be creative, send a spark out there, right? So that's where, I just feel like that's such a valuable thing to just, if you can't get away from the tools entirely, how do you start to tap into the different parts of the tools and use them differently? That's just something I think is going to be valuable. The last thing I'll say about this, because I know we're over, is just I think first party data on your website is really, really important. Creating ways for people to submit information to you through your website and tell you about themselves. I think we're going to see that really developing. And a lot of us are going to have to, as data and privacy laws change, we're really going to have to be thinking about how do we make sure that our websites are amazing, that our websites have purpose, and that when people come there, they actually have an experience and that they are able to really feedback with us about that experience. I think, we can engage people on social media, but we can also advance our understanding of how we engage them on our websites. And I think the data that we're getting from free third parties is really changing. So first party data, where you get people to sign up for something, attend a class, connect with you in a more personal way, like I said, which is more like networking. The more that we do that, and we figure out how our websites can integrate into that, I just think that's going to open up opportunities we haven't thought of before. Because right now we've sort of decided things like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok are the ones giving us those opportunities. And so we use their software, their systems to do it. And of course, we're never going to have as much money as them to develop our own websites. So in a lot of ways, we have to utilize that. But I do think we're going to see those things changing, right? I think we're going to see our ability to do things on our own websites change. And I think we want to have more ideas about how we really connect with people so they willingly give us information and tell us what they need and what they want so we can actually respond to them. So yeah, I know that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that's helpful because I feel like, again, there's a lot of people that are asking these questions of how do we redirect? How do we better values align in 2022? And, you have to get creative and you have to innovate and sort of get outside of the box. I also think there's always new systems getting created and we don't always have time to go explore what's trendy, but I do think, again, in the spirit of self-awareness, it's important to kind of watch what's happening because one of the things that I've noticed is the real rise of niche groups of people. So Facebook groups is a great example, but even when I look at things like Reddit or Quora, these places where people are asking questions and getting answers and sharing information, it's very, very specific. So I think a lot of us in the small business world, we're also starting to explore how can we go participate in other communities that maybe are more niche and more, focused on one topic or one particular problem that we solve. But how can we really go into those communities so that we're not just having to be somewhere like Facebook, where we're kind of shouting into a void of millions of people all the time and we're hoping 5 people care. It's like, how can we go into these more specific groups? Even Reddit groups have very specified things that they're trying to accomplish. So when you step in and participate, it is really like networking. You're connecting with people and giving them more information about how they can improve upon things, what you can really do to help, your perspective, you're establishing your expertise. So I think as those different types of sites continue forward, it's going to be important for us to diversify away from kind of the tech giants, as we call them, right? We may always have to involve ourselves with them somehow because there's just a lot to this conversation where corporations and the government and other things are all connected. But those tech giants that have kind of swallowed the earth, they're really not the only ones there. There's huge opportunities for other types of conversations that are going to be more productive, right? Because you're going to talk to people more specifically about what they want and need, show them how you can help. So that's something you can encourage all of your clients to be thinking about. But again, thank you all so much for the extra 10 minutes. I appreciate it. As usual, I really appreciate everybody joining me today. Happy New Year to you all. And like I said, look for some great announcements coming up towards the 1st of February about our digital drop-in series. It's going to be happening all year, the first Wednesday of every month, and our new class series that we're going to launch. We hope that we will see you at the webinars, but we hope we'll see some of you in our actual live classes. Because I know for me, it would be great to see some faces and learn a little bit more about what people are doing currently as we go into the new year. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your Wednesday.